Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Earth on Survival Guide, a podcast for novices, masters, wardens, newbies,
Journeyman,
old hats, journeymen, casual players, hardcore GMs, and Josh and myself. I am Dan. Of course, with me is Josh.
Hi, everybody.
And on today's podcast, we will be discussing all things thaumaturgical. Thank you, Kigorsi, for the word. I forgot about that one from Shadowrun. But today's topic is the Elementalist. In minute, accurate, natural detail, I guess we can go with that. So anyway, yeah. Before we get to that, if you have any questions for us, we'll be answering some emails as they come in, I guess, every other episode or so. And if you have any questions for us or want to provide us some feedback, we'd love to hear it. You can contact us at edsgpodcast@gmail.com. Other than that, we should start what we always do, I guess, for the Elementalist. This is our second spellcaster, actually.
Yep.
And we're going to hold off on the breakdown of spells until much, much later.
Until another episode, yeah.
That is a whole pile of talking right there.
Yeah.
So otherwise, Elementalist is, the first thing I like to cover when I talk to new players about it is there are 5 elements in Earth Dawn, not 4.
Yep, that's
and
something
the fifth
that
one throws them
the
off.
fifth one being the fifth one being wood, but the 5 elements is something that is kind of taken from Chinese alchemy, I believe.
Yes, I believe you're right.
Where the 5th element in Chinese, I don't remember specifically, but I know it's metal is one of theirs. Like they distinguish between metal and earth, and I don't. I'm not up on it. So, but I know
Fair.
that the 5 elements is a Chinese thing.
Yeah.
Earth Dawn does wood. It does the traditional Western 4 plus wood.
It just makes it fun. So
Yeah.
it adds a little Earth Dawn wrinkle to what you would expect from an Elementalist in a fantasy setting. So yeah, it's air, earth, fire, water, wood, and make whatever innuendo you'd like to about wood being an element, but that's you go from there. Being a spellcaster, of course, the important attributes are naturally perception and willpower. Again, perception is where you get your spell count from and how well you notice things, prepare for things. But your willpower, since we haven't done spellcasters in a while, with Wizard a while ago, willpower is where, of course, you get your oomph to cast your spells and how effective they are.
Yeah, many spells have their effect based on the caster's willpower. The will force attribute, the will force talent, is based off of willpower and allows you to do stuff in addition to that. So having a high willpower is important. It's especially important additionally important for elementalists because elementalists are one of 2 disciplines, core disciplines at least, that deal with spirits, and willpower is also somewhat important for interactions with them.
Absolutely. And we're going to hold off on spirits for another episode.
Yes.
A little bit down the line. So.
I like talking about spirits, and there's certainly not time to talk about them in addition to this.
No, not so much. We're not going to give you a 3-hour podcast today, promise. Well, at least we're going to try not to give you a 3-hour podcast today. I love the fact that the Elementalist's karma ritual, again, largely unchanged, if not completely unchanged from other editions, is that they have to use all the elements, but they are also making a triangle because the number 3 is one of the first magical numbers in numerology. So it's just one of those cool things that they actually use a magical triangle as part of the ritual, but of course they have to boil a pot of water, sing to the fire to encourage its heat. They extinguish the fire with the water, add the earth to the water, turning it into hot mud, so forth and so on. And so everything is there. They use all 5 elements in their karma ritual every time. Yeah. So I love that aspect of just, seriously, that's one of the better karma rituals, to just hone in on everything you're supposed to be doing.
Yeah, one of the things that gets talked about with the Elementalist, when you look at the old essay from Adept's Way, for the most part, is the idea of balance between the elements, is that things get out of whack when one element gains dominion over the others in some way, at least within sort of the natural context of them. Obviously, in a place like Death's Sea, fire is going to have a much, much stronger presence than you would say water. And so the idea of the elements being a part of and driving force behind the workings of the natural world, and the elementalist's job is to monitor them and make sure that things stay on track and proceed as they are supposed to through the proper interactions and balances of the elements in all aspects of life.
So partially an environmentalist.
Yeah, there is definitely there can definitely be environmental themes that go along with the Elementalist. Of course, there are also some Elementalists choose to focus on one element over the others. They may, depending on how you want to play it, gain a little bit of a bonus when doing spells that are allied with their chosen element.
Fair.
But consequently, they would be penalized when dealing with spells that are of the dominant element over them. Because traditionally when you have the Western sort of 4-element thing, you have two elements that are each in opposition with each other. Yes. Fire and water and earth and air are kind of in opposition. Because you've got the 5 with wood kind of thrown in the mix, what you actually have is more of a circle.
Yes.
Where I don't have it right in front of me, but earth is dominant over fire is, there's called the Litany of the Elements. And I think it's in the companion in the enchanting section. It originally showed up back in the original Adept's Way for the Elementalist, but it basically lays out each element is strong against one and weak against another. And so if you're an Elementalist that has chosen a dedicated element, if you've decided to specialize in that way and your game master is going to provide you with mechanical benefits to do that, you would then have penalties for things that are, not in alignment. So I think fire is dominant over wood.
Yes, because it burns wood.
Right, like fire destroys wood by burning it. Wood destroys earth by something.
Yeah, I loved it. It was beautiful. Whoever wrote it did a great job. I just cannot recall it off the top of my head because it's been at least a decade since I last read it. So But
the idea would being that if we're correct and fire is strong over wood and you are playing a wood-focused Elementalist, you would get bonuses for doing wood stuff, but penalties when you're doing fire stuff because fire is stronger than your chosen element. And it might be that rather than bonuses to wood, you would get bonuses when doing stuff against elements that are weaker than yours.
Yeah,
as opposed to neutral. But it's an interesting idea. There isn't anything in the 4th edition books that actually mechanically supports that.
No.
But if that's an interesting idea that you want to explore, go pull up the old Adept's Way book. They've got some info on that in the game information chapter in the back. And, bonuses maybe of +1 or -1, depending on what you're dealing with, or, not that big a deal, but it might be an interesting way of exploring, and especially having your character's personality being defined and shaped by the element that you're associated with. That someone who is sort of aligned with water would be a much more sort of placid and whatnot, as opposed to someone who might be fire aligned, for example.
Fiery and passionate, a little bit instigative if they're mostly a fire. I happen to have an orc already as an Elementalist player. Sorry, I have a player who's playing an orc Elementalist who's already passionate and fiery and leans toward the fire spells. That's careful on that one. So anyway, but they do have a wonderful, so the Artisan Skills naturally are, of course, the usual ones for most spellcasters, a robe embroidery.
Yeah, they get the embroidery because that's the traditional craft back from the days when spellcasters would, rather than having purely astral spell matrices, it would all be matrix items where they have to weave their spell patterns into their robes, both as an indication of their chosen path and to demonstrate their artistic ability and not being
tainted.
Not being corrupted by the horrors.
So there's that. And they also get sculpting.
And then sculpting, which makes a lot of sense. Like, you've got an Elementalist dealing with, stonework and things like that. It seems like an interesting or appropriate choice for them as an alternate if they aren't going to be going the embroidery
I could
route.
see, pottery as well, working with water and earth. I could also see wood carving at the same time.
Wood carving,
so, yeah, just a couple things to have in there.
Making neat stuff out of driftwood.
I whittled this. Sorry. So yeah, leading on down to their half magic ability, knowledge of nature, the elements, uses of elemental magic, other magical rituals and so forth, sensing an elemental spirit, and so on. So they have a neat little half magic wrinkle that not everybody gets.
Yeah. The Nethermancer, who we'll be talking about in a later episode, gets a similar ability with their half magic for ally spirits, which is the second of now in 4th edition 3 different classes of spirits that adepts can deal with. There's actually also the Invi, who are the bug spirits. They're something else entirely. Yes. We'll talk about them at a later date as well.
Absolutely.
But that half magic ability for Elementalists is something that's pretty much carried forward from when it was first introduced for them back in 1st edition days. Yeah. I think it was introduced at the same time that the rules for spirits were introduced, and basically saying that that Elementalists can use half magic to detect the presence of elemental spirits. Yes. And it's something that they should be able to do, but really is not something I think that requires its own special talent to be able to do.
I like it as a half magic test because, again, it also improves along with your circle. So you get better at noticing, you get better at figuring out, you get better at communicating, and it's an automatic level of just maturity in the character for how they interact with those spirits. So I like it being half magic. And
yeah,
4th edition's made more of an emphasis on half magic abilities than previous editions, or at least expanded upon them and made them more useful. So thank you for that. Okay, so moving on to the other stuff. They have a durability of 3 because they're a spellcaster.
Yep.
So not frontline. Do not put them in the front of anything unless they're going to cast a serious spell. But they do have 2 free talents, which of course are the Matrices.
Yes, they get 2 standard Matrices for free at first circle. We talked about this back with the Wizard. And, talked in other discipline discussions about why we went with the free talent options and that sort of thing. So we don't really need to belabor that point here, but like all magicians, they get those 2 standard matrices for free.
One of the best moves ever is the matrix, of course, increases with their circle automatically. So it'll always hold the circle of spells that the spellcaster has. So that's it. If they have a spell higher than that, you're on to some other kind of magic. Anyway, so that takes care of the basics. On to the discipline talents that they get at first circle. Awareness. And we've talked about that as a higher form of perception. And since they can notice spirits with their half magic ability, why would they not get awareness? Because as you said, almost every discipline is going to get that at some point really early on. This just makes sense that it's core for them to notice the world around them. No argument. Pattern craft.
That's their ability to basically understand magical stuff. They use pattern, all magicians use pattern craft to learn new spells. They would use it to examine magical writings or runes or spell effects or basically any kind of thing where they are interacting with patterns of some sort. It would be what you would roll to kind of study and understand those things. And I think generally speaking, the difficulty would be higher for types of magic that they are not familiar with.
That makes sense.
But then you sort of have that in conjunction, like it's the difference between pattern craft and the half magic ability that gives magicians knowledge about magic stuff is that the half magic is more just like a general knowledge, kind of like duplicating like the skills of various, like the actual knowledge skills. Whereas pattern craft is what you would be using if you were actually looking at a pattern and studying it specifically.
This is your magical divination.
Yeah. Like, you're seeing like an enchantment or a ward or something like that, like a magical inscription on a wall when you are actually studying it and trying to figure out what it means and what it might do.
What makes it tick. Yeah. So just to recap pattern craft, we'll do that again 2 more times when we do the other, 3 more times, 3 spellcasters. And of course, the natural, you have to have this as a spellcaster on thread weaving and spellcasting.
Yes, spellcasting and thread weaving. In the Elementalist case called Elementalism, because every thread weaving talent is actually unique by discipline. Yes. But basically, thread weaving, in addition to allowing the Elementalist to weave permanent threads to magic items or group patterns or all of that fun stuff, it also allows them to weave the threads so that they can then cast spells.
Yes.
Both of those talents are based off of perception, hence why perception is an important attribute.
Gotta have it.
And you need to, because spells are such a large part of the magician kit, you want to generally have those
effective
raising as effective and raising as quickly as you can.
So that's why they're in first circle, not anywhere else. You can cast spells right off the bat. And the last one, not exactly hidden, just alphabetical, wood skin. And of course, goes back to the Elementalist. It's named after an element, wood.
Yep. It's a little bit strange if you think about it because wood skin is a talent that enhances your physical resilience.
Yeah, your unconsciousness rating.
It allows you to take extra, allows you to take and absorb extra damage. So compared to the other magicians, none of whom get an ability like this, the Elementalist is a little bit more
buff.
a little bit more buff. And some of these like non-spellcasting tied things are chosen because of the strong elemental flavor that goes with them. Like wood skin, the idea behind that is that you transform your skin into a tougher sort of bark or woody substance that allows you to take more damage. And that kind of transformation and that kind of assumption of a pseudo-elemental form is like right in flavor with the kind of stuff that you would expect an Elementalist to be able to do.
So it makes them slightly more frontline than the others, but not
well,
too
I wouldn't say that it makes them. I wouldn't say that it makes them more frontline, but it does make them potentially a little bit more tougher. Yeah. Like it is popularly seen. I think that the Elementalist is, of the four core spellcasting disciplines, is probably the most, for lack of a better term, most combat castery. Agreed. Just in terms of the perception of the spells that they have, though everybody has spells that can fill in that role. But some of the other stuff, the Elementalists get some really good support spells as well. Yep. But yeah, just that, like, again, the woodskin is chosen not so much so that it can make the Elementalist a, like, frontline combat caster type, but more that it plays into their theme of balance and unity and oneness with the elements and how that can shape them and express through their magic.
A nice little Earth Dawn type twist to a spellcaster, and I applaud that. Second circle, they get, of course, a +1 to their Mystic Defense, because spellcasters usually do. And their discipline talent is Fire Heal, again, named after an element, but involving an element as well.
Yeah, this is one that I don't think we have discussed this one before. I don't think it's come up yet. Fire Heal is kind of a double-edged sword.
It is. I've used it.
You build a big fire. Like it takes time to do, but you basically build a big fire and jump into it.
You have to build a large one. It has to be big enough to engulf you.
Yeah, you have to build a big fire, like a bonfire, and jump into it.
Freaking troll Elementalist, it's got to be huge.
And what you are doing with this talent is basically trying to gain additional recovery tests. This is another case where the image of the Elementalist as a sort of more physical caster comes into play, because they have one of their discipline talents is to gain additional recovery tests, which makes it nice. One of the things that does, and we haven't talked about Questors, and we won't really talk about them in depth until much later.
That's a whole other episode.
But the talent, the additional recovery tests that you can get from Fire Heal not only allow you to maybe heal damage, but to power abilities like Woodskin, which cost a recovery test in order to use them. The more recovery tests that you try to get with Fire Heal, the more difficult it is, and if you fail, you take a wound. Like it's a cool, like, flavorful little ability.
Don't enter into it lightly.
Yeah, you that's one of those where you really want to go like, okay, because you know what the difficulty is going to be ahead of time. You look at your step number and you go, okay, what am I likely to be able to pull off? This is one of those talents that you do, like, you know ahead of time that you are going to be getting into a situation where those extra recovery tests will come in handy. And so you do it in the morning, or you do it in advance of your planned assault on whatever
castle,
place you're going
Dragon's
into.
Lair. No, don't do that. But the good news is it's a discipline talent, so karma.
Well, remember in 4th edition, you can spend karma on everything.
I'm just making sure everybody heard, but yeah.
So that is no longer the concern that you would have had in previous editions, where only some talents allowed karma. Yes. 4th edition, all talents that you have through your discipline allow you to spend karma.
So on to 3rd circle, and they get, of course, the karma point on recovery tests.
Again, we're like getting this kind of sub-theme of recovery and endurance.
One feeds the next, feeds the next. This is a staircase you get to build on.
Yeah. So you get like, you've got wood skin, you've got fire heal, you've got now karma point on recovery tests.
Yeah. So this is just feeding the beast. One thing feeds the next.
You know, and again, I think for less from a like, oh, I am super tough warrior type. It's more, I am drawing on the energy and the power of nature to renew and restore myself.
And enhance that resilience. Mm-hmm. But their discipline talent is Elemental Tongues.
Yeah, this is a talent that basically allows the Elementalist to communicate with elemental spirits. Mm-hmm. It basically, similar to the speak language or read and write language talents, you basically make the roll with elemental tongues, and if successful, you learn the language of one elemental spirit.
So again, high on perception.
Yeah, and once you know that, then you can talk with them back and forth and so forth. You make a roll sort of because elementals are not known necessarily for being like super
gregarious.
Well, it depends on the spirit.
True.
But in terms of like the mindset, they are maybe a little bit alien in some regard. Like their concerns and what they're interested in are not the same as normal people's.
Nope.
And so there is kind of a role with elemental tongues, and it's got a secondary role when dealing with negotiating with a spirit if you've summoned one to do tasks or anything like that, to basically see how effective you are at conversing with and getting your ideas across to the spirit in question.
Yeah.
And it is useful not just for summoned spirits, where that talent is specifically called out as part of the process, but for any elemental spirit that you might come across in the wild. It's part of the reason why it kind of shows up where it does, is that in the course of their novice tier, in their apprenticeship, as they are learning sort of the initial foundations of their discipline, they would know and would have had an opportunity to speak with various elemental spirits before they get to the point where they are actually intentionally summoning them up.
Yeah. It's only 3rd circle, which again, we've mentioned before, you get to pretty quickly in your first couple of adventures. So on to 4th circle, they of course get a +1 to their physical defense.
Yep.
And not social. Not
social, but to physical. It's again playing a little bit into the more like wilderness,
hearty
kind of theme. Yeah, hearty theme. So they get physical defense.
Yeah.
And their discipline talent is Elemental Hold, which basically allows them to keep an elemental spirit in place.
Yeah, stay here while I talk to you. Because I can talk to you at 3rd circle, I can hold you in place at 4th circle. So stay here while we have a conversation.
Yeah.
So yes, you can't go yet. But that's, first 4 circles, again, very solid. I don't see anything to swap out. But here's what we can swap things out for, if we want to.
Well, here we come with the novice
talent
options. Yeah.
So this is how you flush them out. Air speaking.
Yeah.
Which we've not talked about either.
Might have come up. This is one that basically, it's in the troubadour options list.
That's why. Okay.
It's on there because of the air association. It was originally in 1st edition, I think, an elementalist talent. Like that's where it showed up, and I think it was only with them.
I believe so.
And basically allows the elementalist to communicate
over
with
great distances.
Over large distances, and to be heard, whether to be heard easily, even over like background noise, as basically they are able to have the wind carry their voice.
Yes. It's like a really super powerful walkie-talkie. Just kidding.
Something like that.
And then one of my, of course, favorite talents that we started off the actual podcast with, I think minute 1, was Arcane Mutterings.
Yeah. This is a fairly standard talent or option for magicians because they have a reputation for being weird and being able to make dire portents and unsettle people by acting all spooky and like arcane
ominous
knowledge and stuff like that. So
yeah, Arcane Mutterings is fun. Confuse the locals and move on. Of course, and you Astral Sight.
Yep. It's an option mainly because there's not. It should be available at novice. You've got a discipline that is going to, at least in some respects, likely be dealing with dealing with spirits and astral entities, so should have the potential to be able to see things astrally. Don't obviously want to hold off on making that available as a discipline talent until Journeyman. That doesn't make a lot of sense. But it's also not strictly required because of the half magic ability for Elementalists to be able to detect the presence of a spirit nearby, even if they can't see it.
Yeah.
And then to perhaps be able to converse with it and have it manifest and then be able to deal with it face to face.
Yeah, the only thing I might swap that out for, and I mean might, would be Fire Heal. That's about it.
If you're going to be doing that.
If you and your table, you and your game master, go for it. Avoid blow, which I think is necessary. Across the board, but for a spellcaster, you get avoid blow.
A very broadly useful defensive talent. We've talked about it, I think, with every discipline that's come up. So it's in there in the options if you're going to be having a game, especially if you've got a smaller group of players where you're not going to have like a robust front line to keep creatures off of your spellcasters.
Yes.
You may want to give your spellcaster avoid blow.
Absolutely.
As the talent so that you can raise it a little bit more easily and spend karma on it, as opposed to taking it as a skill.
Rightfully so. Yes. So by all means, avoid blow should be there. Climbing, which I think is an interesting one to have in, just as a nice little storyline wrinkle.
Yeah, it ties in a little bit to their sort of wilderness and nature theme of things, climbing cliffs, climbing trees, climbing, and it's a somewhat useful, it makes sense that you could even like skin it as and you can do this with a lot of the talents, and we haven't really talked about this a lot, but one of the things that you can do is using the talents that your character has and how you narratively describe them as a way of expressing your character's philosophy, and how the climbing of an elementalist, let's say, for example, they're climbing a tree, if they're using the climbing talent, they may be communing with the mostly asleep spirit of the tree that makes it a little bit easier for them to like find convenient handholds and things like that. Yeah. Whereas the climbing that is expressed by, say, a scout or a thief or somebody like that would have a different approach in terms of how they do that.
I can imagine a scout climbing it like a lumberjack would. As fast as possible, but very securely. And then a thief would climb it like a ninja. Be very quiet, don't rattle the leaves at all, and just get up as stealthily as possible. And not necessarily quick, just to disturb the tree as little as possible. So yeah, I appreciate that fact.
There's a very, like, a lot of opportunity for narrative richness and role-playing that doesn't need to be spelled out as stuff in the mechanics.
Yeah.
And so that is something that I really would encourage people to explore and think about as they work on their characters, and why they have the talents that they have and how those are expressed in the framework of their philosophy and approach to their discipline.
And just 2 or 3 sentences, like you mentioned now, are a great way to just kind of add that flavor to the game you're playing and enhance the players around you, and let your game master know this is how I see my character, and so maybe you can see the same thing.
Yeah,
from what I'm doing. So a wonderful little flavor wrinkle. Then we're on to item history.
Yeah, it's item history as a
option
pattern. Yeah, as an option, as a pattern related discipline, and having some kind of astral. That's a talent that you would probably take if you were going to be going into a more, rather than a sort of like wild caster of the woods, we're going a more like scholarly type of approach to the elementalist.
Yeah, absolutely.
If you were gonna take like you're focusing on the elements and stuff, but maybe tossing in a dash of wizard in terms of being like more formally educated and having a different approach to things there. And so item history with the understanding of magical patterns and stuff that might come from that point of view. And also because item history is such a useful talent to have, making it available as an option to just about anybody that it makes sense to prevents that from being completely locked out to groups that don't happen to, say, have a troubadour or a weaponsmith, who are more traditionally the ones that
have item history,
that have that talent,
or wizard, as you said, the knowledgeable ones,
or wizard. Yeah, wizard. I think it's still an option for them, but. Yeah,
I like the fact the elementalists could have it because, again, it's an item. It's made of something. It's either made of earth, iron ore or steel or whatever, or it's made of wood
or leather. I mean,
or it's
even
meant
though
to
that's
carry
more sort of
water, something like that. So it's made of something, and it's one of those elements is in there, and that
would be again a way to express how the elementalist's approach to that would be different from a troubadour's.
Exactly.
Or a wizard's or something
yes,
like that.
item history, well explained, belongs on that list. And of course, another option is a standard matrix.
Yep,
so that
getting
you
a third.
could start with 3.
Yep, a third standard matrix so that you could have 3 like ready to go matrices at first circle.
Mm-hmm.
That's if you're going to be going more of a like focusing more on spells route.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost never a bad idea to have extra matrices if you can get them. Extra matrices with, if you have a game where matrix items are going to be a little bit more common, you may not need the extra standard matrix talent. But especially as you get on in your career and maybe have more spells that having more matrices handy so that you have more of your toolkit ready to go at a moment's notice is always a very handy thing.
Yes. Now, since it has been a while since we talked about any spellcaster at all, the 2 free talents of matrices don't require any legend points.
That's correct.
This one does?
This one would.
Okay.
Because this would be bought and raised as a talent of whatever circle you buy it at. It's possible that if you hold off for some reason and want to take standard matrix as your option to talent when you're a journeyman, you would pay journeyman prices for it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Although at that point, you start looking at, well, then you have all of these options that are available in journeyman. Why aren't you taking the enhanced matrix that's available there? Exactly. Unless there was other stuff, but.
Totally.
Yeah.
But no, I just wanted to I'm asking questions on behalf of the listeners who can't grab their books right now because they're traveling somewhere, commuting, whatever. But yeah, just wanted to clarify that. And then we've got 3 left. So tracking.
Yeah.
Again, and deals with nature.
And which combines nicely with wilderness survival for a couple of talents that would be very appropriate for a more sort of wilderness and nature oriented elementalist.
Yes, environment.
Understanding the environment and things like that. Wilderness survival, being able to find water and shelter and things like that when you're out in the wild areas of the world.
Exactly. And then of course the last one, since wilderness survival got melded in there, wind catcher, which I find wonderful to include for an elementalist to use.
Yeah, well, I mean, it makes a lot of sense.
It does.
Basically that if they fall and they have wind catcher, they can basically use the power of the air, call upon the wind to slow their descent, and if they roll well enough, perhaps direct them a little bit to where they want to land.
Yeah. So going back to your point of this is how you'd add flavor to the game, they would actually be asking the spirit to catch them or soften their fall or welcome them to the earth and so forth. So.
And along similar lines, elementalists are very useful when it comes to elemental mining operations, like elemental air and that sort of thing.
Yes.
Yeah, and if you're an elementalist whose career is going to be along that route, having a talent that allows you to survive being squished if you happen to fall overboard.
Yes, gravity is a harsh mistress.
Yeah, is also not a bad one to have.
100 legend points for anyone who can tell me where that quote comes from. Gravity is a harsh mistress. Anyway, so yeah, again, I think that's a nice solid foundation for any elementalist. You've got some varied options there to go with either the environmental aspect or a slightly buffer, not exactly warrior aspect, but somebody who can mix it up a little bit more. And or the knowledgeable aspect, going along with the air speaking and the item history.
And the arcane mutterings and astral sight and things along those lines that can be a little bit more.
You got a nice little flavor options there in your first 4 circles. Really, really solid. Okay, on to 5th circle. You get another free talent.
Well, the free talent in this case is that one of the standard matrices that you got at first circle gets upgraded to be an enhanced matrix. So at that point, if you haven't taken any additional talents, you've got 1 standard and 1 enhanced matrix as your free talents. Again, both of them at that point at a rank equal to your circle so that you've got places to put your spells.
Absolutely. So get your eraser handy and just rewrite one. And so the enhanced matrix is different.
Holds a single thread pre-woven. So if it's a spell that requires threads, it requires you to weave 1 fewer than is indicated in the description. If you happen to have a spell in there that is a 0 thread spell, you can choose one of the extra thread options that's available for the spell and have that be in there all ready to go without needing to actually weave it. So for example, Earth Darts, which is a 0 thread spell, you put that in your enhanced matrix, you can choose the extra thread bonus to give it a greater range or whatever the options are.
More damage. Yeah, fair enough. So, yeah, just wanted to clarify for the listeners real quick what the difference was and why that's a good thing to have.
Yeah.
And then they get, of course, the fire and ice.
Yeah, this is the first of two sort of elemental themed abilities, like discipline abilities that they get. So they basically get two for one strain. They can do one or the other of these with a successful thread weaving, successful elementalism test. It costs them their standard action to do it. So they do it in place of spellcasting or something along that. And basically they create a small flame, which only lasts for a round, but is enough to light something on fire.
Yep.
And they can use it in combat to do basically a small amount of actual damage. And they can also freeze water by touching it. And they can also use that in combat to do the same thing. It's just cold damage instead of fire damage. If they want to like grab somebody's arm and like, cause them severe frostbite and that sort of thing.
Yeah. So if you have a desire to play one of the X-Men, Pyro or Iceman, you're all set. So yeah, and of course the Karma ability is to...
and then they get a cool Karma ability.
Target an additional ally with a spell by spending a Karma point on that.
Right. And basically what this allows them to do that if they are like casting a beneficial spell on someone, they can just spend a Karma point to basically get an additional person affected by that. If they're casting air armor, for example, they can, with just a Karma point, get a second person affected if they don't want to go to all the trouble of weaving an extra thread to get a group of people affected by that. So
not only at 5th Circle does their standard matrix go to an enhanced matrix, they get fire and ice, and they get this Karma point they can spend on to target an additional ally with a spell you're casting. Then they also get a discipline talent. So really they get 5 things at 5th Circle, which is summon elemental spirits.
Right. This is the point at which
Elementalists retire.
Well, this is where you really start to basically where they have the ability to intentionally, rather than just maybe dealing with whatever wild or rogue spirits that they might encounter, they actually have the ability to call a spirit to them from the elemental planes, make a deal with it for it to perform a task, and do that. In 1st edition, summon was purely a half magic ability. Because spirits and the rules for spirits they were sort of talked about, but they were not really introduced as mechanically until the Magic Source book. And so consequently, the rules for dealing with them and summoning them basically got added on as half magic abilities because there weren't any talents that were already defined to do that. You had some of the talents like Elemental Hold and Elemental Tongues that were already in there to deal with the spirits, but you didn't really have any rules for them until later, which left game masters kind of going, I'm not sure what to do.
I'll make it up.
And then the actual summoning was a half magic ability. That got fairly, in later editions, got fairly quickly changed over to be an actual talent. For a couple of reasons. One, the old half magic rules, the step that would be added for that would be just half of your circle rounded up, unlike where it is just flat your circle, as in Earth Dawn, as in 4th edition. And so making it a talent meant that you could actually have a rank that you could increase and whatnot. And so, the Elementalist gets the ability to call elemental spirits to them, and they can... check out the chapter on summoning. We will talk about summoning when we talk about spirits here in the next couple of weeks or so.
Yes.
Because I've got a lot of discussion and thoughts about those. But they basically, they get that at 5th Circle.
Yeah. So
now they are journeymen. They have now had some experience in terms of talking and dealing with elementals as part of their training and whatnot. And now they have the ability to actually call and command them.
Yeah. And that's only at 5th Circle. Which is, like I said, again, at 5th Circle, they got a bunch of stuff. So I can't say you plateaued, but man, you hit the peak of a mountain there somewhere with everything you can do. So on to 6th Circle, you get another plus to your Mystic Defense. And then this is where Will Force comes in. Will Force used to be like a 4th Circle for everybody else.
So in 1st edition, Will Force was... Journeyman either 5th or 6th Circle, depending on the discipline, except for Nethermancers who got it at 4th, which meant they paid Novice rates for it, where everybody else paid Journeyman rates, which is why Nethermancer was such a popular target as a second discipline for magicians, because they could get access to Will Force sooner as a result.
Yep.
Will Force is basically the talent that is your damage increaser for your damage dealing spells.
Yeah, it's your magical version of the physical.
And it comes into play. Yeah, basically anywhere where you use willpower in a spell effect, you can then spend a point of strain and increase it by your rank in Will Force. So it allows your spells to hit harder and have a greater effect.
For only a point of strain, that is worth every penny.
Yeah.
Just gonna say.
And it also means that because it is a talent, you can then also start spending karma on effect tests.
Yes.
Which you could not do prior to that point.
Mm-hmm.
So Will Force is a really big bump in terms of spellcaster power and effectiveness when it comes to damage dealing.
Yeah. So 5th circle and 6th circle for Elementalist is the, next plateau and the next plateau right after that, because they are big and bad. 7th circle, you get the additional recovery test, which again plays back to the first couple of circles of fire, heal, and getting all the recovery tests built up. And then, of course, Earth Skin, because you have Wood Skin. Earth Skin is just one. You have
Earth Skin.
Better.
Earth Skin is another sort of similar talent that boosts you. I don't remember what it does off the top of my head. Let's see. Earth Skin.
It's been so long since anybody actually got it.
Oh, so you make a roll and you get +2 to your Mystic Defense for each success. So it's basically a Mystic Defense booster.
Which makes sense.
Makes it harder for you to be affected by spells and
other things
Mystic
like
Defense targeting magical effects.
Absolutely. Yeah, Wood Skin and Earth Skin can be used in conjunction, so by all means do that.
Yeah, each of them costs a recovery test to use, which is where your fire heal and your additional recovery test start to come in handy.
Yeah, it's like this was planned. I'm just kidding. It was well thought out. How's that? And then 8th circle, you get to the extra Mystic Defense again.
Another Mystic Defense bonus. So at this point, you're at a total of +3.
Yep.
And then
cumulative.
Yeah, and then your discipline talent is Hold Thread. Up to this point, when you have woven the threads for a spell, you either cast the spell or you lose the threads and have to start over. With Hold Thread, there are some restrictions on how it can be used, but otherwise it allows you to weave a thread and hold it. You pay strain basically to hold it for more than the moment, so you can maybe cast the spell later or something like that.
So 30 seconds from now, we're holding it for that
time. I think it's universally an 8th circle talent for all spellcasters. I think they all basically get access to that at the same point.
Yeah. So again, a great foundation for your second half of your first 8 circles. Yeah. So the next 4, but we have options, of course, and you got to go through those.
Yep.
Banish, because if you could, of course, call an elemental or summon, you should be able to get rid of one.
Yes.
As well.
And, basically what Banish allows the magician to do is not just to get rid of elemental spirits. They can also get rid of ally spirits or inveigh or animal spirits. It's just a little bit more difficult. They have to score an extra success in order to do that for a spirit that they are not familiar with.
And it's an extra 5. On the roll. So not too difficult, I say, not having done it.
Well, depends on how powerful the spirit is, because I think the difficulty is based on the spirit's Mystic Defense, which is not going to be low for powerful entities.
No, not so much. And then, of course, Cold Purify.
Yep, this is a poison and I think maybe disease as well, healing.
I almost always have to look this one up because it's so, I can't say vague, but it's just that name. It sounds great. But I have to make sure I know what it does. So I always look it up. You conjure pure cold water and use it to soak and provide poultice to magically draw out a poison or other illness.
Yep, poison and disease. Basically, it stops the effects of poison or disease from going forward, and it heals damage as well if there was damage that was involved.
Yeah.
Basically, if the target number for stopping the poison was an 8 and you rolled a 15, in addition to stopping the poison, they would heal 7 points of damage because the healing is the difference between them. Because it needs to actually get into, there needs to be a visible, entry point for the poison, if you're treating poison with it. So if they were bit by a snake, then you would apply the Cold Purify to that location. If it was a case where they ingested it, you actually need to cause a wound to the target in order for the magic to get inside of them to deal with it. Well, so there is a little bit of a dark side to that.
Everyone's going to have a dark side.
So hopefully they're not so far gone that the damage from the wound will push them over the edge.
It's like the boots of healing from D&D. I remember you have to kick them and do some damage, but heal them, hopefully more damage. I may have that wrong. Anyway, on to Dispel Magic, because of course...
Dispel Magic,
should be right up their
at that point. Yeah, for the maybe more scholarly inclined elementalists, who would be more like studying patterns and things like that, and maybe more sort of spell oriented as opposed to the more wilderness types. But yeah, it is something that there used to be back in early edition days. Dispel Magic was a spell, and each discipline they added like a version of Dispel Magic that just would dispel their type of magic. So it would dispel Elementalist magic.
Always found that limiting. I understood why it was there.
I mean, it's not a bad idea. It's cool, whatever. But with the shift to Dispel Magic being a talent, it doesn't really make sense to have different talent versions for that for each of the different schools of magic.
Yes.
So it's now just basically like they have the option to do it. It is not something that is required, but for those who might be along those lines.
Yeah, it's a wonderful option. And of course, you get the option for a second enhanced matrix.
Yep.
And we just described what that does.
It's a matrix. It's good.
Yeah. And then Fireblood, which I always love as well, because that one can heal you in the middle of combat.
Yeah. It is one that synergizes kind of nicely with Fire Heal, because it can, you get extra recovery tests, and it allows you to make those make recovery tests in combat, or to heal damage. It is not technically a recovery test.
Yeah.
But it allows you to heal damage in combat at the cost of using a recovery test, and it provides a bonus to your toughness for that, so it allows you to actually kind of heal more than you otherwise would.
Yeah, I misspoke on the recovery test. It meant healing damage, because that's what I was going for. I just mixed the two up.
Yeah, that's sort of an after effect clarification, basically to avoid some of the more egregious like stacking of effects that heal you, like booster potions and things like that. Fireblood and a couple of similar talents that heal you are explicitly not recovery tests, so that they don't get the bonus from healing aids in order to, I've got Fireblood at rank 7, so in addition to the 7 steps on top of my toughness, I am also now going to drink a booster potion to get an additional 6 or 8 or whatever it is on top of that.
Yeah.
It's basically, it's like, let's try and keep things into some semblance of, like, healing is already, like, when you've got the money to get healing aids and you get, spells that can boost your recovery tests and things like that, healing can actually be relatively quick if you've got the right group makeup.
And can get out of hand. So, let's keep it realistic. And I know we're saying that about a game based on magic, but realistic-ish, along with the mechanics to kind of hold that in place. And then one of my lesser known, but always fun to say, Gliding Stride talent.
Gliding Stride is another like sort of pseudo flying talent. It allows the adept to like gain altitude and things like that, to basically sort of dance on air and perhaps to like gain heights and whatnot without needing to do such things as mundane as climbing.
Yeah.
Or use it to perhaps like sort of move across on the air across a gap or something along those lines.
Yeah, I kind of equate this with the Michael Jordan's, horizontal/vertical leap from almost half court to, you can do that. You can do that slam dunk if you want to. That'll get you there. So Gliding Stride is good for that. Navigation for an elementalist.
Navigation, ties into their bond with nature and wild places. Mm-hmm. If you're going to be going with that sort of elementalist scout type route, where they might on smaller like airship mining crews and stuff, the elementalist might serve as a navigator or first mate and be the one that sort of helps guide the ship to where it needs to go.
Yeah,
that's one possible avenue there. But navigation is also a generally useful talent, and being able to need to get to where you're going can be useful, and it ties into that wilderness theme.
Absolutely. So it works quite well. Safe Path.
Another wilderness survival related kind of ability. This one, the text actually, I think, explicitly calls out the fact that it kind of talks with elemental spirits in the area and uses and taps into their knowledge to know what safe path, how to avoid hazards to get from where you are to where you want to go.
Yeah.
So again, if you're looking at sort of a scouty or a wilderness focused elementalist, it's one that's kind of up that line.
Totally. And then one of my absolute favorites of all time, Steel Thought, is it should be there for any spellcaster.
Steel Thought, which we've talked about, as a defensive mystic defense talent. Not really quite so necessary where they get Earthskin as a discipline talent that allows them to potentially boost their mystic defense, but it is, where they would have the ability to reinforce themselves or potentially shake off spell defense, mystic defense targeting attacks when they are at them.
Mm-hmm. When they are targeted. And last and certainly not least, because we should explain this one very well, Tenacious Weave.
Yeah, we talked about this all the way back with the Wizard. Tenacious Weave is a talent that basically increases the dispel difficulty of the Elementalist's spells. The Elementalist has a lot of really nice combat support spells in their repertoire. Air Armor being perhaps the most useful and famous.
Yep.
But Flame Weapon is another nice one as well. And having Tenacious Weave where you can, because those are spells, enemy spellcaster that has Dispel Magic can get rid of them. And that's not good. So Tenacious Weave would allow you to basically makes it more difficult for those spells to be eliminated.
So would you do Tenacious Weave before or after your spell casting? When does it come in the progression?
I think it's part of the process. I think it's a simple action, so it's done at the time that you do it.
Oh, it's a free action. Hi.
Free action. Okay.
No, fair. I had to look it up. So I would write these things down.
But yeah, basically you make a test against the dispel difficulty of the spell, and for each success it increases the dispel difficulty by 2. But it's a free action. So basically it's as you are casting the spell.
Cast your spell, take a point of strain, do your Tenacious Weave, improve its dispel difficulty, and move on to the next round.
Right.
Okay. That answers that. So we are covered on Elementalists, and as I said, that's 8 circles of fantastic, well thought out, and you've got at least 2 or 3 clear delineations of what kind of Elementalist you would like to be.
Yeah, whether you want to go with the sort of...
And that's before you even pick out spells.
Yeah, exactly. And so whether you want to go with the sort of wild magician who lives in the woods and is like along the lines of a beastmaster / scout kind of flavor.
Yeah.
You've got a more bookish type where you might be dealing with things like dispel magic and item history and things like that. And then you've got the option of going with a little bit more combat castery, where you will have avoid blow or gliding stride, which is a nice little sort of defensive, somewhat useful in combat situation.
Yeah.
Steel Thought, Tenacious Weave, things like that, where you would be basically, again, not necessarily right up front mucking it up hand to hand, but being closer to the front lines and providing support for your allies that way.
Absolutely. I have one of my players decided to make it was going to make an Elementalist, and he was going to base it off of one of his favorite animes, The Airbender.
Avatar,
The Airbenders.
Avatar, so The Last Airbender.
Exactly.
On Netflix now, if you have not seen it, go and watch it.
Yes, he's a huge fan. And he said, okay, I want to make this kind of Elementalist, where to draw the water from, how to move the air, and so forth and so on. So that was his basis of, if you don't know quite what you want, or what path you want to go down, as far as the ones Josh and I just described, yeah, that's my popular culture reference right there for an Elementalist, at least.
The cartoon series, not the movie. Not the live action movie.
Just to clarify. Fair enough.
The Elementalist is great. I think all of the magicians, all of the core 4 magicians are really, really cool and flavorful, and each kind of has their own niche that they occupy.
Yes.
The Elementalist is the one that I am most inclined to give to someone who is new to the game, if they want to play a spellcaster, because it is a lot easier to grasp conceptually, I think, than some of the others.
Fair.
Illusionists are always troublesome, and we'll talk about them another time.
Yep.
Wizards are a little bit more esoteric, and I think tend to require a little bit more understanding of Earth Dawn magic theory and all that kind of thing. Neithermancers are cool. obviously.
We'll just leave it at that.
Neithermancers are cool, but I think there is just something like fundamentally understandable about the Elementalist because of the iconic notions of fireball and like
Ice storm,
basically like combat,
winds,
like damage dealing spells in fantasy games are typically aligned in some way with elemental forces.
Yeah,
and that's something that is very, very strong. That doesn't necessarily rely hugely on the spirits aspect of things. Unfortunately, you don't really get the spirit stuff until a little bit later in their progression. But it's a really, really strong and easily understood archetype, even if there aren't necessarily a lot of really, we talked about Avatar, but really like strong pop culture things that you could look at and say, oh, that's an elementalist.
Yes.
The idea of a spellcaster who has spells that are elemental in nature are very present in a lot of places. It's something that's very easy to hook onto and
it is.
Take
I can
as an idea
usually
and build
point
off
to
of.
the X-Men because you've got Pyro who's fire, you've got Iceman who's ice. Usually, there's maybe a character I can't remember whose name can do things with water, but you've also got Storm who can command the other elements, and so storms and lightning and so forth. And that's just pretty much it. You can just say, here's the effects you can see from the spells you're going to cast just using those right there. And wood, you can kind of figure, if you've seen like Groot.
Because well, yeah. But what wood does is that Elementalist kind of, if you're going with that sort of wilderness route, kind of fills the role that would typically be filled by, say, a druid.
Fair.
In more traditional fantasy games.
Yes.
Which is a nature aligned spellcaster. It's just that sort of within the framework of Earth Dawn, nature encompasses not just like wood and growing things, but also all of the forces that combine to allow life to proceed.
Yes.
And elementalists don't tend to be quite so concerned with animals quite so much as they are, say, maybe with plants or living things, although certainly with their role in the wilderness. And Beastmasters and Elementalists, I imagine, have a really nice, while there's not a lot of synergy in terms of what their abilities are, there's, I think, can be a really nice back and forth and collaborative feeling there. When you're dealing with ones that are kind of focused on the wild spaces and the things that live and operate at the, outside the borders and walls of civilization.
And outside of themselves. So, they're focused on their role within something else greater than them.
Yep.
So,
Yep, and some of the most iconic, we're talking about spells another time, but some of the most iconic Earth Dawn spells are Elementalist spells.
Yes.
I mean, we mentioned Air Armor. You've got Earth Darts. You've got...
I love Ice Mace and Chain.
Ice Mace and Chain.
Love that one.
Obviously you've got Fireball as an Elementalist. You've got Lightning Bolt as an Elementalist. Yes. Like if you're thinking about the classic like kick-ass spells, they frequently show up, or more obviously show up in Elementalist.
Yes, and we didn't even check our books. My book is closed. Josh doesn't have a PDF of. We're doing this from memory.
Mind Dagger for the Wizard is sort of equivalent maybe to Magic Missile.
Yes.
To kind of take that, but like a lot of the stereotypical like blasty spells show up in the
Elementalist region,
in the Elementalist toolkit.
So we'll go through. Anyway, I don't have any further thoughts on the Elementalists other than they're cool. We've got nice flavor for them, a wonderful idea on how to branch off into one of any three directions or mingle those three options as well.
Yeah, Elementalist is also something that you'd want to look into if you are interested at all in crafting.
Yeah.
Enchanting in particular. Elementalist works really, really nicely to some extent with Weaponsmith, because they are both sort of crafty and along those lines. The old school, the old first edition Weaponsmith actually picked up Elementalist stuff very, very late in their progression.
Yes, they did.
Which was a little weird, but they would get, like, they got a matrix and some spell casting and stuff like that.
Yes, I had a Weaponsmith on that path. I loved that. I was like, oh, give me the spells.
The Elementalist gets access to some decent enchanting stuff, and a lot of the, like, more common magic items, like the Firestarter or the Clean Broom or the Dwarf Winter Night Cloak or things like that, are all created with true elements, bits of raw elemental energy that are kind of woven into the pattern of the item. And all of that is largely the domain of elementalists and or weaponsmiths, depending on
the enchanting realm of both. So they are permeating most of the things you're gonna come across as far as magic items are concerned. So
and they're also handy. They get like some good they synergize really well with Questor of Garland or of Jasperi.
Mm-hmm.
Some of the powers that they get through either of those synergize really well with the Elementalist, because the Elementalist gets a couple of decent, like gets a good recovery spell or two.
Yeah.
In with Air Mattress, which is good for the overnight sleeps, and they get there's a higher circle one that they get that is really, really good, like in combat healing. I don't remember the name of it now, but we'll talk about spells another time. Anyway.
So, hey, we're done. We're wrapping this one. We will turn this one off now, but we're still going to say goodbye. Thanks, Josh, for making the time. Reach out to us if you have any questions on Elementalists or their spells. We'll get to the spells list later on. Promise that's a whole other discussion.
Yeah.
But feel free to contact us at
EDSGpodcast@gmail.com.
Otherwise, folks, time for you to go make your elemental legend.
Have a good night.